Mr. Ky, in 1964,
You can have to move back because I see papers.
you wanted to take the war north. Why did you do that? What did you hope to accomplish?
Well, because military speaking, I think that's the only way we could stop them. I mean, you could stop the invasion of the communists.
Can't just fight within South Vietnam.
There's no way. I remember during the Guam conference with President Johnson, I instruct Cao Van Thieu, the Chief of General Staff at that time, to give to the American delegation a complete briefing about our plan, you know. In that, I asked the agreement of American government to support the idea having me as a volunteer to go north with 2 or 3 Vietnamese division. All what we asked them is to provide us with air support or, you know, a naval supply.
But back in '64, when this question first came up, what was the reaction of the Americans?
I remember many conversations I had with Secretary Dean Rusk, for example. I had the feeling that the American government always afraid that if we go north and the Chinese communists will, you know, come south to rescue the Vietnamese communists. And
What did you think of that? Would they have come?
well, I remember at that time I told Mr. Dean Rusk that that thing will not happen. I don't think the Chinese will come south to rescue the Vietnamese communists.
Why?
Well, because I don't think the Vietnamese communists will ask the Chinese to come south. And second, I think even at that time we knew that the Vietnamese communist leader are more or less side with the Russian. And that's something that the Chinese don't like. And you see, what happened today proves that I am right in my judgment.
But our goal was always independence for South Vietnam. Was yours the same?
I beg pardon?
The goal of the United States was always independence for South Vietnam.
Yes.
It wasn't to conquer the North. Was your goal the same?
Oh, yes. Yes.
But did you want to reunify with all of Vietnam?
Yes. Sure that every Vietnamese want to see Vietnam unify. But at that time, our first priority is to bring, you know, peace back to the whole Indochina. In the works to stop the communist invasion first, and then let the people of both South and North live in peace for a while, and then maybe later on let the people decide by themselves.
But the best way to stop it was by heading north.
Yeah. In order to destroy the enemy capabilities to sustain invasion war.
You finally had a chance to go north in February '65. You were in the lead plane of that reprisal attack at Chap Lake.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what happened and how you felt about it?
Yeah, but it again, it's a very limited mission, you know, using only air power. And but even for a limited, you know, mission, incursion into the north, it provides us a big excitement at that time. I was commander of the Air Force at that time, and I remember that for the first air mission, when we crossed the border, I had more, pilot volunteer than what we need for the mission.
It was good for morale to finally be heading north.
Yeah, yeah.
There was a lot of Buddhist unrest in 1964 from sort of August on. Was Kang stirring this up? What was he doing at that time? Well, why all the unrest?
Well, why the unrest? Because remember, the Buddhists raised to power not only 64, but back in 63, after the coup, against President Diem. And the Buddhists become a political force, strong and well organized. But then, I think the Buddhist leaders, they thought that they are the real power now. So they began to ask, too much. Kang trying to play a smart politicians. He tried to accommodate, not only the Buddhists, but all the other groups, other factions also. And that's the cause of the downfall of Kang, because there are so much groups, so much factions, so much differences that you couldn't please everyone and get the support from everyone.
Were you instrumental in trying to get him out?
I arranged the departure of Kang, but I never really wanted his departure. I arranged his departure only after he shows that he could not govern anymore. Remember at that time, coup and anti-coup happen every 2-3 weeks, every month in South Vietnam.
So you gave him a medal and sent him on his way?
Yeah, I think that's the best arrangement I can get for him. I like him, but because his instability, political instability. So the feeling among the senior, general officer at that time was against him.
Tell me about your relationship with Ambassador Taylor, in particular about the incident. I think it was December 1964 when he got you and some of the other generals and gave you a tongue lashing.
Well, when Jim Taylor was ambassador in Saigon, I was the junior officer, I think, 1-star general commanding of the Air Force. So actually, I didn't have too much, relations or conversation with Taylor. But we had met once, and I had the impression that he looked down, on us like a big brother, looking down the the young junior officer.
Tell us what happened when you first went into the American embassy to see Taylor.
Well, I think that day the armed forces had decided to abolish the National High Council, a civilian body. So I think Ambassador Taylor was very, unhappy. So that morning we were all meet together at the headquarters of the General Chief Staff. And General King, after talking with Ambassador Taylor in the telephone, he said to us, he said that Taylor wants to meet with me, but I'm not going, so why don't you? He asked me. And General Thieu and Admiral Kang, I think, the commander of the Navy, and General T. So four of us, we went down the American embassy to see Ambassador Taylor. So when we first came in, in his office, he looked very, very, unhappy. He didn't even shake hands with us, just say, okay, sit down. So we sit down and listen to him. And he said, well, gentlemen, remember a few days ago I gave a dinner. And I told you that we want stability, we don't want any trouble, any changes, and now see what happened. You abolished the National Council and so on. So he said something like, it's a waste, either a waste of time or a waste of a food that he gave to us. But well, I understood that it was a waste of a food. So I said to him, I said, now listen, General, I don't think it's a waste, because I remember that the piece of steak that you gave to me, it's the best piece of steak I never had in my, whole life as a poor Vietnamese. So I really appreciate the food. It's not a waste. So he said, why you did that? Why you did? I said, well, why you did? Because we thought it's in our interest, the interest of Vietnam. Well, that's a whole conversation, because he didn't convince us that we are doing wrong, or either we convince him that he's wrong and we are right.
How did you feel in June of 1965 when you finally became the Prime Minister? How did you feel then? Were you optimistic? Were you excited?
Frankly, remember that that day, because the fight between the civilian factors, at that time we had Chief of State and the Prime Minister, both a civilian, but they belong to two different political parties, So at the end, they couldn't govern, because the Chief of State, is against the Prime Minister. So I remember that night, about 11 o'clock, they called all of us, the Armed Forces Council, to the Prime Minister office. And they decide both, resign. and handed the power back to the military. And after that, we had a long meeting at the headquarters of the Marine Corps to decide who will be, the next Prime Minister. And I remember that we first proposed General Nguyen Van Thieu, because he was the senior officer at that time. But facing the difficult situation at that time, Thieu refused.
So then,
And then after that, we proposed a few more.
when you were finally appointed the Prime Minister, how did you feel? Were you excited? You finally had a chance to run your government.
Well, I'm not excited because first, I didn't want that responsibility. I didn't want that job. But as I mentioned earlier, after almost 2 days meeting, and after we proposed a few more senior army general like Corn, T, and all they declined, refused the responsibilities. So at the end, they all come to me and said, well, what about you, Ky? Because now that the civilian handed the power to us, we must have someone, responsible for the government. So when we come back to the meeting, and I ask all of them, 60 or 70 of them, in the room, I said, okay, one more time. Anyone want to be Prime Minister? And he said, no. So Thieu said, I propose Ky. And all of them just stood up and, accept the offer. But then I didn't give them the answer. I said I have to go back and talk with my wife first. And when I told her about that offer, she was not excited. She said, "Oh no, not that job, not as a Prime Minister." I said, "Oh, what can I do now?" So I accept the role and responsibilities with only one goal in my mind, which is to bring back stability to South Vietnam, to write a new constitution, and to establish a new regime, a democratic regime in South Vietnam. I was not excited. I accept the role, responsibilities as any other responsibilities toward my country.
How did you feel when the American troops were building up in '65? Was this necessary, or were you worried that they would take over the war? Were you glad when they came?
No, I didn't think that they will take over the war, over the responsibilities of the Vietnamese. But then, 68, 69, they really took over, the responsibilities. And
But at the beginning they were necessary.
no.
They were not necessary?
Well, at the beginning, when I was Prime Minister, I think we need additional troops right at that time. So the arriving of American troops was welcome. But instead of strengthen, the Vietnamese armed forces to replace, the American unit, you see in the next years more American troops coming. they really built up a big, massive armed forces, air, sea, and ground forces. So after that, they are so, involving in the war that they took over everything. And that's bad, because at the end we lost our own identity. The communists became the true nationalists, and we become American puppet. And that's American press help a lot too, to make it appear that we are, puppet of American.
We'll get to that later. But let me ask you about the Tet offensive.
Let's just cut from it. Speak.
Mr. Ky, let's jump ahead to the Tet offensive. Why wasn't there a general uprising as the communists had hoped for?
Because the majority of the Vietnamese are against communism. That's what I'm trying to tell everyone, for many years, that basically we are against communism. And not only the Southerners, but even the people, many people in the North are against communism.
So their goal of trying to inspire a general uprising, do you think this was a realistic goal?
That's what they thought, but the Tet Offensive shows to them and to the whole world that the Vietnamese armed forces are capable to stop their offensive, and also to show that the majority of the Vietnamese people are supporting a non-communist regime in South Vietnam.
You won the battle, didn't you?
I won the battle. I can say I won the battle because I was by myself that night. Thieu was out of town, and I was by myself. At 2 o'clock in the morning, the base commander, he called me. He said, well, better you took a helicopter with your family and go somewhere because it's no longer safe, the base. They are inside the base. And he said to me that he had many casualties, he had no reinforcement, and he didn't think he could hold them longer. Well, I said that if you stay, and then I will stay. And then we stay and fight them, and we stop them.
This is at Tan Son Nhut?
Yeah. So the next morning I took over the command, direct the troops, the security forces, the police forces, and I dispatched General Tang down to the Four Corps, the Delta, and we actually cleaned them out, old city, within 2 months, and they suffer a lot of big, heavy casualties.
It was widely reported in the American press as a victory for the communists.
I don't know, during the wartime, everything they did, the American press make it a big noise and big victory for them. I had the impression that all along the war, the Western press siding with them.
But it wasn't a victory.
No, you can see by yourself that the people stay with us, and the soldiers stay and fight, and it was a victory for the non-communists.
What was,
A tiny bit more.
the press also gave us a picture of vast social changes in 1960, after 1968. You know, prostitution and overcrowding because of the refugees and so on. Did this tear apart the fabric of South Vietnamese life? Can you comment on that?
Prostitution. Tell me, is somewhere in this works that there is no prostitution? Tell me some city, some country where there is no prostitution. So there is prostitution in Vietnam, in Saigon, of course. There is corruption, of course. There is black market, yes. But because we are living in war for a long time, 30 years, and with the big presence of our foreign troops in Vietnam, it created a lot of social problems. But we recognize the problem and we face them and try to solve it. But we lost the war not because prostitution, not because corruption, but because from the beginning we had adopted a wrong strategy. That's all.
Military strategy.
Yeah.
What was, when you came to the United States in 1970, what was your reaction to the demonstrations and the media comments? Did you think that the U.S. support for South Vietnam was running out? Oops. Near the end of the American involvement, when there's all the American people and the American wealth and money, and didn't this have a real effect on South Vietnamese customs?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Tell us about it. What did you feel personally that it was doing to your society, the American presence?
Well, like a black market, you know. The press at that time tried to blame it on Vietnamese official or Vietnamese people, but you know that most of the goods that come, that's selling at the black market come from the various PX. And so it's wartime, and a lot of people, both sides, American as well as the Vietnamese, are involving in the black market. So it created a big upside down the society.
But did you feel your society was losing its identity, and how?
Yeah. Well, losing identity first, because at that time, all you heard about war is, from American side. So people are paying more attention about what Mr. Johnson said, what General Westmoreland said, what McNamara said. But concerning what we said, what we think, the people just ignore it. That's the biggest loss, we suffer. Even among the military, the Vietnamese unit who fought alongside American unit had received more commodities, or more facilities, ice cream, food, cigarette. So at the end, they are so Americanized that I remember one day I told Thieu and Nguyen that if we continue like this, and someday when American withdraw, go home. The Vietnamese armed forces will no longer have all the the facilities and commodities that we have today, and the fighting capacities of soldiers will diminish.
Not enough ice cream.
Yeah.
Those higher.
I think it's really, changed, the face of the society, and in a worse, not better.
The communists could then say, well, we're the ones that are going to preserve the society.
Exactly.
You tell me that.
Well, that's the reason they use it for their propaganda. They said that we are puppet of American. We are working, for American, receive money from American, die for American. While they are the true liberator, they fought for a nationalist cause and for the Vietnamese people. So when you look just at the surface, when you look at what happened, to the society, a lot of people listen to their propaganda and believe them. That's why I remember one day I told Mr. Johnson, I said, why don't you just stay, behind the scene, like a Russian, like the Chinese, and let us make the show, do the show. He just smiled, and we never get, a good response from American government. They want to do, most of the time, they want to do it by themselves. Well, like a big executive officer of a big, manufacturers. That, I invest money, soldier, equipment. So I want to control, I want to direct, and I want to take decision.
Tell me, when you came to the United States in 1970,
Awesome. That song's going. Mark it.
when you came here in 1970, all the demonstrations and the media comments, how did you feel about those?
Well, I had demonstration in New Zealand, in Philippines, and of course during my visit to the United States back in 1970. I can tell you an example. When I stayed in Williamsburg, before I went to the White House, we stayed one night at Williamsburg with my wife, and it was very cold. And the next morning when I wake up, there was a group of 30 of them, a young, so-called hippie, long hair and dirty. They stood outside shouting. So we were escorted by 21, a secret agent at that time. So I asked the chief secret agent to invite them, to come inside the hotel, and I will come down and talk with them. So first he said, "Oh no, I can't let them, come closer to you because they are dangerous people, taking drugs and so on." So I said, "No, just let them, because it's cold outside. I invite them to come inside, warm, and I want to meet and talk with them." So finally they arranged for not all of them, but about 15 of them to come inside the lobby. So I come down and I stood there, they all surround me. So I asked them, what are you against? And they said, "No, I'm against the war. We are against the war." Well, I said, me too, I'm against the war. The reason I'm against the war, because in war I risk my life every minute. And you can see that I have a beautiful wife and beautiful family. And I want to live, not to die in wartime. So as you, as any other people in the world, I'm against war. But when the war is imposed on you, and when you have to defend your own country, and then you have to accept war. As I said, we are against corruption. I said, me too, I am against corruption. Do you think I, as a chief of government, I am corrupted? They said, not you, but your government. I said, yeah, it's true, there's corruption in Vietnam, as there is corruption in anywhere. Can you tell me that in your own society, there is the most advanced society in the world, can you tell me today that there is no corruption? And they thought about it, they said, oh, you're right. So, I talked with them and I explained to them everything, with honesty, with my heart. And then when I left for the White House, they all stood there and, clapped. And the guy from the State Department, who escorted us, he said to me, well, I think President Nixon needs you to stay here as his advice, for PR, public relations. So, that's that kind of a meeting. I had many in my life.
But in general, were you discouraged by the way you were received in all the demonstrations? That must have hurt your feelings.
No, not at all, because I know that whether they're against me because they're ignorance, or because they belong to the other side, the communist. And I know that I cannot change the communists. I cannot change their mind, as I know that they cannot change my mind. Now, for the people who
Market.
I want to go on to the election in Saigon in 1971. Why did you withdraw from the race?
well, because we knew for sure that we will not have a clean election. That Thieu will rig the election. That's all.
That he would rig the election?
Oh yes.
But why?
No, the reason he won the election with 104% of the vote.
So,
Wow, why? Because power corrupt. Once you stay there for 4 years, you want 4 years more, and after that you want 8 years more, and
no, so you didn't want to be part of this?
No, not at all. And the American ambassador Bunker wants very much that people like me or Big Ming, participate in the election, but we refuse to play the game. And even Bunker come to my house and offer financial aid if I accept to run against Mr. Thieu. But I didn't accept it
Why?
because I'm honest.
During 72,
Go ahead and drink if you like. Go ahead now.
Okay.
during 72 and 73, when the peace negotiations were going on, did you think that the South could survive the terms of the proposed agreement, the ceasefire in place and so on?
Well, the South could survive with only one condition, and that condition I mentioned it to Mr. Nixon and later on to Henry Kissinger. And that only condition that we asked was the communist North Vietnam will accept to withdraw all the North Vietnamese troops from South Vietnam. But at the end, I don't think we got this agreement from the communist North Vietnam.
No, the ceasefire in place and they stayed there.
Yeah.
Did you feel that Nixon and Kissinger were abandoning you?
Well, I feel that particularly for Henry Kissinger, he's I had the feeling that he made more concession to the other side, to the communists, than he really trying to defend us as a friend.
You sort of felt as if he was abandoning you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he made too much concession to the communists. Well, the fact that, is irony, was that after the treaty was signed, and both Kissinger and the communist Le Duc Tho both got the Nobel Prize for peace. So, you can see that we, the non-communist Vietnamese are the victims.
These are some questions for Elizabeth Dean. After the agreements, there were immediate violations, I guess on both sides. How did the Thieu government view the violations from both sides?
Well, you know that in any military truce, unless you have international forces, for the control. Otherwise, if you just leave it to the two parties involved, of course, they will violate it, and the fight will continue. That's what I suggest to them before the treaty. That I said we should have, once the treaty was signed, international forces, for the control and the implementation of the agreement.
But Washington could have been more helpful at that time if there hadn't been Watergate and Nixon's resignation and so on. But were you keeping a close eye on Washington, what with American politics? Do you think they affected the...
Yeah. I didn't realize that factors, before my visit 1970 to Washington. But then after that visit, I come back Saigon, and I told Thieu that we should do something, concerning public opinion in America. But Thieu didn't listen to me.
Okay.
What were the thoughts in Saigon at that time about Nixon's resignation and Watergate and all that business?
Well, first we thought that Watergate is, the whole thing was ridiculous. It came as a big surprise for all of us that because Watergate, an American president had to resign, because we don't think Nixon did something different than other, American president, than other American politicians. The only thing wrong with him was, not coming out the very first minute and admit that yes, I did it, like others did it before me. But now, if your people don't like it, okay, I apologize. I will not do it again, and that's it. Finished.
How did you feel all this would affect?
But then after he resigned, and then we saw the trouble coming, because, and now the Congress and the press, had the control of everything. The executive branch, with the resignation of the president, it was so weak at that time, couldn't do anything to help us. Concerning the press and the Congress, we knew before the resignation their feeling, their reaction about the problem of Vietnam. So we were, we know that we are in trouble, because no longer after Mr. Nixon's resignation, we had the support of the Congress or the public opinion, no more.
On the 1st of January 1975, when the communists attacked Phuoc Binh, did you think you were in trouble then? Did you think this was the beginning of a big final offensive, or was this just one ordinary battle?
Personally, I knew that it was the beginning. But as you know, in the past, we had such kind of offensive, every 3 months, every 4 months, every 5 months. So I believe that we could, resist the offensive and stop them. But then, when it happened with Ban My Thuot, and seeing the 2 corps commanders and his staff, retreat to the south and abandon Pleiku, I went to see General Nguyen Van Thieu and asked him to give me troops, tanks, and then I will let that column to reoccupy Ban My Thuot. And Vien said you can do it, but he had to ask the Thieu permission. And that permission never, reached us. So we lost the whole 2 corps area.
The highlands were always traditionally have been very important, and they were very important to French strategically.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, because when you see on the map, the figure of Vietnam, the one who can occupy the highland can cut Vietnam in 2 easily. Second, because they have the Ho Chi Minh Trail and their troops, their centuries in Cambodia. If they can occupy permanently the highland, and then it's a link between, the highland and the north and the Cambodia and Laos. So in the long run, we're lost anyway. They will cut Vietnam in 2.
In April, later on, when the North Vietnamese army was sweeping down the country, you were trying to work out a coup against Thieu, or to force him to resign.
Yeah.
If you had gained some political power then, how would you have coped with this massive assault?
I think the whole problem is the military leadership. When you look back in every battle from the beginning, Ban My Thuot and Pleiku, the 2nd Corps, and then Nha Trang, and then the I Corps, you can see that what happened was the corps commander, chose to run first. So I thought that if the commanding choose to stay and fight. The soldiers will stay and fight with them. And the whole problem for us at that time was the troops stay and fight. That's what I told Martin when he came to my home, American ambassador, when he discussed with me about, having me taking over the government and what will be our military, position, strategy, and political and so on. So I told him that the first thing we have to do is stop the enemy advance, by having our troops stay and fight. And I could do it. If I stood there and fight, they will, stay and fight with me.
Did he encourage you to take over?
Yeah, that's what he discussed with me when he came to my home.
Why didn't you?
Well, and then we wait, He said something like, well, give him some day, he will make an arrangement for Mr. Thieu to go and something like that. But then what happened was, the French ambassador, went to them and offered a solution acceptable to the communists, which is Mr. Thieu go and Big Ming replace him as the head of the government. So they accept the solution, and what happened you can see.
Now, when you actually left the country, when did you think it was all over? When did you have to leave, and how did you do it?
Well, I'm a soldier, so even in the last second, I still had some hopes that I could do something. So that morning of the 29th, I stayed up on the air the whole night, directing air power to destroy the last missile position of the enemy. So the next morning, I went to the headquarters of the General Staff, from where I tried to call the Marines, the paratroopers, the Air Force, try to call all the units, and maybe have the last meeting trying to do something. But then all they left the morning of 29th. So I was by myself, in a big compound of the headquarters. So at noontime, when American helicopter, start their evacuation flight, my aide-de-camp, he said to me, "Well, General, I think it's too late now." And of course, the communists are, coming all over. So he said to me, "You couldn't do nothing. It's too late now. It's better you fly out." So I decided to fly out with my own helicopter to the Midway aircraft carrier.
What was it like when you landed on the Midway?
Well, with the helicopter, it's easy landing.
You flew it yourself?
Yeah.
Tell us that you actually flew it. Most people wouldn't think that you flew it. They thought you have a pilot.
I think all I know, the only thing I can do well is, flying the airplane. I'm not a good politician, I'm not a good diplomat, because I'm too honest.
Did you feel that the Americans would somehow hope that the Americans would come in during this April period, that the B-52s would come back, and that were you waiting for us to do something?
a lot of people, a lot of Vietnamese people are, hoping, expecting that American government will, but personally no, because 3 days before the end, I had a meeting with that guy named Abbott or something. He's Assistant Secretary of Defense of Material. He came South Vietnam to oversee, the evacuation of the material or the destruction of the material. So I met with him at the headquarters of the Vietnamese Air Force. So I asked him if I decide to go south, and regroup the troops down the Mekong River, the Delta, and continue the fight. You think the American government will support the idea? And he looked at me and said, no. And he said, when I go, you better go with me.
If you look back at the whole history of the war, when did you feel it was lost?
As I said, until the last second, I'm still hoping that, I personally can do something. But as I said earlier, that, since right after the Paris Treaty was signed, I felt firmly that with Thieu in power and nothing changed, we're going to lose the war to the communists. I said it before it happened, and it happened as I said it.
Was the problem Thieu, or was the problem that the North Vietnamese were left in place?
Well, I think mainly the problem with Thieu, the problem of military leadership for the South Vietnamese government. Because if we are strong enough, we can deal with the 300 to 400,000 North Vietnamese troops.
Did you feel betrayed by the Americans in Paris?
No, because in the whole affair, I still think that we, have to bear responsibilities because it's our country, because it's our government, our people, our armed forces, and because we are not capable to build a strong army, a strong regime. That's why we lost the war.
You want to go back? Will you go back someday?
I'm going back. There's no doubt.
Let's start one more time, sir. Are you going back, sir?
Oh yeah, I'm going back, no doubt. Because, when you look at the situation of Vietnam today, millions of people are suffering, whether in the so-called education camp or living in misery. It says not only no freedom, but no food, no medicine, nothing. When you look at, thousands of so-called boat people who trying to, risking their life, risking everything, trying to escape South Vietnam every day now. Who they are? They are not imperialists. They are not the enemy of the regime. They are just a poor, innocent peasant. Why those people, still today have to risk everything to escape the communist regime? And even today, they still use my name and look upon me as someone who can save them, liberate from them. So it's my duty and my responsibilities. I have to go back. There's no doubt.
20 feet left.
Why do you want to go north in 64?
Well, I want to go north because that's the only way to stop them, And also, there are sanctuaries in the south for them. So there is no way, no reason why we don't have our own sanctuaries of North Vietnam. And not only we can, use those centuries as a rally point for the anti-communist people in North Vietnam, but also tying down their troops so that they will not have, too much to send down south. It's very clear and simple. That's the reason.
Centuries, you wanted to establish outposts.
Yeah. Well, a big centers, a big, safe zone for our military camp. And particularly at that time, with the support we can have from the air and sea, American sea and air forces, it's easy.
And that continued to be your feeling all the way along?
Oh yeah, all the time. And also I advocate the blockade of Haiphong, mining of Haiphong. And that's what Nixon did, but they wait how many years to do it. They should, do it right at the beginning.
Well, I think this is just right.